Hello, it's April 7th, 2022, and this is the weekly Backdrop developer call. We get together every week and talk about priorities and tasks for Backdrop Core and some things beyond in some cases. We'll go ahead and do some introductions for those who are in the meeting. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm Quick Sketch on the internet, and I'm a core committer for Backdrop. We'll go to Wilbur and then Robert.
My name's Wilbur Ince. I'm Wilbur on the internet. Thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm Robert Lang, bug folder on the internet, coming to you from Altadena, California.
All right, welcome. This is it for today. Today's crew is slim but mighty. Let's see. We normally do a contrib update. Jen's not here. We'll skip that portion for today, and we'll just have an extra large lineup next week. We have a forum post every week where we solicit ideas for discussion, and we had two issues that were raised this past week. The first one is issue 5512. Views hooks are not invoked when the path property in hook views API is not set. So an awfully long jargony title there, but it basically comes down to the way that hook views API worked in Drupal 7, I'm guessing, is not the same as it works in Backdrop. That it used to work one way and now it works slightly differently in Backdrop. And there is a pull request that BW Panda filed that just makes it work the way that people expect it to work. But yeah, it needs review. I'm not totally sure about the particular approach. Robert, do you have anything you want to add about this one since you raised it?
No, it's above my pay grade.
Yeah, well, this could actually be something to discuss about how, like, just generally the way that things work in Backdrop. That what the pull request is suggesting is if a file exists, it automatically gets included. And but there is a hook that also lets you specify where the file could be located, and if it is there, and if you specified it, then it tries to include it. So it's kind of a question of like, do we automatically discover a file based on its naming and location, or do we request that a developer points at the file through a hook? And I think that's kind of the big question here is like, how often do we do this kind of magical loading? We do it all the time, of course, with things like hooks, right? If a function name exists, then the hook gets called, and that's the way that it works. But for most other things, we don't necessarily do that based on the file name. I mean, there's the .info file, of course, that gets discovered, and the tests file that gets discovered. But the purposes of those things are to kind of identify everything else in the system that needs to be loaded. Classes don't get automatically discovered. We have hook class info that requires you map the class names to the file locations. And most other things as well, like hook menu, require you specify path in order to say where your callbacks are. And but this is kind of an interesting case because it's like an include file for views, and we have certain things like an include file for tokens, for example, that they automatically get included as well. But they're defined through like hook info. Like you got to manually specify if your hooks get automatically loaded or not. So I don't know. I'm not opposed to the idea of automatically loading the file. I just want to kind of audit the way the other things are automatically included and determine if this fits the pattern of like, should we be automatically including this or not? So that's the only real question here is like, let's try to be consistent, I think. Welcome, Olaf.
Hi.
we're just wrapping up one topic, the first issue. Do you have anything you'd like to discuss today?
Not sure, because I wanted to discuss the card content type images in the design meeting, which didn't happen today, unfortunately. And I'm not sure if it's the right place to discuss it first here or at the next design meeting.
I think because we don't want to wait 2 weeks. Honestly, it's 2 weeks we might not have with the release cycle coming to a close. So let's go ahead and talk about it today. See if we can get it going.
Okay.
I'll finish the forum topics and then we can go right to that. Okay, and the second issue that we had raised in the forum is issue 5480, a stalled issue that IndigoZilla raised, that the the access method on the file entity doesn't do the same thing as the function file underscore access. So we've got two different things that check for file access, and they don't work the same way. Normally, what we prefer to have happening is we still have procedural wrappers for object-oriented methods. And normally the procedural wrapper, like node load, for example, or node view, then calls the underlying entity and then just calls the same method inside the entity. That's what we would prefer, so that it works both ways and it works consistently between them. And I believe this issue is basically trying to unify those two things. Unfortunately, this is stuck, but the real holdup is just on a technical review, and I don't think there's actually that much that needs to be discussed. So I'll try to take a look at this, but this is actually just a call out that we need technical review on issue 5480 to try to move this forward. One thing that is a little bit of a concern here is that IndigoZilla is providing steps to do testing. She's saying, oh, well, we're having trouble moving this forward. Here's some things to test, which is, first of all, very helpful, because even if you're not familiar with code, you can definitely try out doing these testing these things out manually. But that is a concern to me, because it says that maybe we need automated testing in here as well, because that should already be covered through the automated tests. So that's one thing we could potentially do to move that forward, is add more testing. But really, this comes down to it needs code review. Okay. I wish I had more things to say on that issue, but yeah, I think that's where we are. Okay, well, let's go ahead and do an update on all of the 122 issues, since we didn't have a lot of forum topics today and we're kind of a small crew. Olaf, let's start with the one that you mentioned, which is the card content type, issue 4903. We have a pull request that creates the card content type, adds it to the standard profile, creates a new homepage layout, puts 3 cards on the homepage, adds a new view. Everybody's looked at it at this point. Everybody's seen it, and it's really, really close. And where we are now, I haven't seen any discussion on the issue in a couple of weeks, other than talking about the pictures that we should use on the cards. Does that sound about right for where we are? Is that the only thing that we're talking about at this point? Go ahead, Robert.
There was something I raised just a couple of days ago, which was suggesting renaming the view and its display to explicitly refer to the home page, to both make it easier for beginners to see that these things all work together, and that would affect the documentation. So like right now, the block is called block, or the display is called block, and the view is called card grid. And I think, well, if we call it homepage view and homepage block or something like that, then it's going to be easier for that beginner that we're trying to make it really easy to see how all these things go together. And I came up with that when I wrote a draft documentation page for homepage and trying to explain how cards work for people. So that was another issue in the last week or so.
Yeah, good thought. I don't think that there's been a lot of thought around the naming convention. So that's a really great call out. Yeah, and that's not very difficult to change either, I don't think.
Yeah.
Did you post your suggestion about what you think it should be?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll take a look at that. Is there anything else that it's stuck on besides this picture problem?
No, I think we then, after a decision about the pictures, still do some fine-tuning regarding consistency and optimal configuration, like what you posted once about the image style, how it's exactly configured and such things. But that's all fine-tuning, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a big difference here between the image style that we're shipping here comes with the standard profile, but it's not an image style that is shipped with image module. And so that affords us flexibility to change it in the future because it's not something that will affect all sites, and it won't be something that contrib modules can even count on existing because it only exists within an install profile, which is just a starting point, not a configuration that everybody can expect to exist. So it is nice that basically everything we're doing, including deciding on these images for what are in the cards, is all stuff that is just populating default content, which means we can change it later at any time and it won't even impact existing sites. Of course, if your existing site was using the 3 default images that came with the cards, you probably haven't changed your homepage. Like, I don't think people are going to actually use the 3 sample images that we use for a long period of time. It's purely just to demonstrate the things in the first place. It's all about the out-of-box experience, not about stuff that you're going to be using on your actual site, although you definitely could, especially the content type and the view.
One thing, Robert, because I didn't read the draft of the documentation, but I think we should consider also to mention how to remove the thing easily. Because I think some people might want to change it, but maybe they don't have an idea which images to use at the moment and just want to remove it. And with the other things, with the first post and the about page, it's quite easy, just delete it. And with this blog, we should mention somewhere how to remove it in the layout page.
So the documentation page I wrote is actually a documentation page about the home page. And it does walk through this home page, but it also mentions along the way the other ways you can create a home page, and wraps up with a listing of like 5 or 6 different ways you can change the home page, changing out cards, use a view, use a layout, create a page. So my goal was to try to do that. I guess I'd ask not just you, but our viewing audience, anyone else who can, because it's an unpublished documentation page, look at the documentation page and see if it addresses that goal adequately. And if not, please make suggestions in the documentation issue to update it.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And also many thanks for working on this, which is really good, important thing.
Yeah, the documentation is very much appreciated. During Backdrop Live, I was so surprised to hear from some of our newer people that were jumping into the community. They were very complimentary about our documentation. They were like, "Handbook is excellent." I was like, "All right, that's amazing." Like, yeah, thanks for helping keep it that way.
And attaboys to BW Panda, who did a big reorganization and kind of was the driving force for setting up the docs site. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, going back to the card content type, Olaf.
Mhm.
Now, yeah, we've had lots of people weigh in on which choices they prefer. Uh, I think a lot of us have reservations about the particular like voting approach to like make a decision, but um, Robert mentioned before the call that it's still helpful to have people's opinions like registered, even if that's not actually quite how we make the decision. I think it's uh, important at this point that we figure out how does this decision get made. You know, even though everybody is seems really, for the most part, amiable. You know, everybody's like posting their favorite choices. I don't think that we have anybody that's really strongly opinionated about this. I think that everybody's just like, there's a better choice. You know, they think that one option is slightly better than another. Um, but now that we have all these numbers, you know, what do we do with this information and who
Mhm.
actually makes the final decision? Um, Obviously, we have the PMC that could be used to make this decision for us. Um, I I'm curious about that because I don't know if that's
Mhm.
like if this is like the level of decision that actually needs to go to the PMC, uh, or uh, or possibly like core committers could get together and they could make the decision. I don't know. Uh, yeah, what do you
I've
think, Olaf?
yeah, I have some thoughts. So first, maybe for people who didn't follow the discussion, just a quick recap. So a few days ago, I suggested, or I made screenshots of the various former suggestions from the discussion. So we had the screenshots, and based on this, I asked people to vote and to mention one favorite and then other suggestions which are acceptable or okay. And um, and then, as you said, some people said they are a bit skeptical about the voting and if that should drive our decision. And first, I would like to clarify that I didn't suggest the voting with the goal to just apply the highest voting, but to get an impression of what people like based on the screenshots. And I think the results are, however, quite interesting, even if they are not already the decision. There's clearly a trend visible. And so if you want, I can quickly share my screen and show a spreadsheet where we
Yeah,
can see the results. Okay,
that sounds super helpful. Thank you.
in a minute. Um, so where is it? Can you see that?
Hmm.
Is it big enough? Or
Yeah, looks great.
okay. So it's really quick and dirty. So here are the 7 suggestions, of which we have screenshots. You can look at them in the issue queue. And I have marked the highest votes of each column in bold orange. So, for example, the 3 different colors from basis got the most favorite votes. And but two other suggestions got the most votes as acceptable suggestions. And so you can see quickly that, wait, these three suggestions got the most votes, are the most popular. So the voting, I think, helps at least to sort out the other suggestions. So we can focus on these three and we don't have to consider the other ones, I think. So let's make them bold for the moment. Yeah, and then 12 people voted so far, by the way. And I've also tried to weight the results. So the totals are these ones. And I've then weighted the acceptable votes only as half as important as the favorites. And so this is then the final interesting column, in my opinion. And still, these three suggestions are the interesting ones. Mm-hmm. And so now it's important to know that I've only provided screenshots for bases in the standard color scheme. So for example, now we could also discuss which of these suggestions works the best also in other themes or with other color schemes. That's just one example. But the advantage now with the voting is that we can focus the discussion on the three most voted suggestions. And I think even if it is just a quantitative result, these are the three best things that we have now. But then in the issue queue, there came up another discussion. If we need, however, a designer. Jen said in a quite negative way that we now have only results which are not better than mediocre. I don't think that it's, I don't agree really, but I think we have to discuss now if we really need a designer and don't find a decision without a designer, or if we can decide anyway and maybe improve the images later. So I think that's an important point for now.
Yeah, here's a interesting. What I would be leaning towards is we have been using the current images for several months now, and there's been other opportunities to change the images, and that hasn't happened. And it's also one of our three favorites, right? So it's one of the top three. I would be somewhat inclined to say, let's roll with that one for the merge, and then make a follow-up issue for changing them to possibly the other two issues. However, considering how tightly tied all three of these options are, I'm not sure that we would ever get anywhere on the follow-up issue. So it would be like a fake, like let's solve this later, knowingly like punting it and never solving it later, So I do kind of feel like unless there's something really drastic, like we have a new theme come into core, that these images are likely to stick around for, until that point. So it would be kind of nice to get the right choice made, or at least accept that the one that goes in is the one that is likely going to stay. So punting it, although tempting, I don't think that would really be fair as far as taking into account people's feedback that they've provided and all of the options that have been put forth. I don't know. What do you folks think?
Wilbur, what do you think? I think you didn't take part in the discussion much, so maybe it would be interesting to get a new.
I didn't vote in the color schemes or anything, but since this isn't a critical item that's going to have a lasting, it's sort of a show and tell item that will probably go away. I think that the designs we have seem to convey the spirit of what we're trying to show without needing much more design. So I would think that we could probably go with those images that we have and be done with it. But and also to Nate's point earlier is that if we want to change those images later, we can. They're not tied to anything else that they can be changed. So if somebody says, hey, those images are really dated, then it's like, okay, we could change them. But I think they look fine and they work well with the color schemes that we have. So I think we could go forward with them the way they are.
And do you refer to the ones which are in the current PR? So the with the green and the what is it? Don't know. And the slate.
Kind of goldish yellow.
Yeah, goldish.
Green, yellow, blue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a lot of comments on this thread.
Yeah, there really are.
Yeah. Yeah, we also don't want to go above 300 comments.
Does it pager in on GitHub?
No, it's
That's just
it makes disappear some comments in the middle, and you can click on it, show them.
Yeah, it shows just a break with 229 hidden items.
Yeah. So I think the same, though, that they are fine to go, in my opinion. And I also tried these ones in different themes, and they look fairly good. Also in opinionated themes like, for example, Opera, which has a big header image, they still look fine. And yeah, and the idea or the wish to get a designer in it, I agree that would be nice, but the designer should, bring some time to really work on it and read the discussion and so on. And I don't know if that's realistic before May. So for that reason, I'd like to stick with the current suggestion.
And note that from your spreadsheet that the 3 top choices you listed were at least acceptable to almost everyone who voted. And different people put favorite versus acceptable. So I suspect a lot of people would not be upset with any of the 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. I also have a little bit of a leaning towards usually only a couple of people make the design decisions. Ideally a designer makes all of the design decisions and then someone else signs off on them, and it's not a I mean, you can provide feedback, but usually the designer implements something and then you try to follow the designer's intention, like from beginning to end. However, in this case, we're only doing one small thing, and I would be inclined to say that if we have the one person that does the sign off, it would be like the advocate for the issue, or it would be the person that is like put in the work. And so I think that really probably would come down to probably you, Olaf, or Tim. So
Mm.
Tim is the advocate, and you're the one that filed the issue and have put in the work and done all the surveys and everything like that. And I think with all the information we now have, it should be one of you that makes that decision. And I don't know that I have the authority to say that you have the authority, but that's the way I think that it would make
Mm.
sense.
So maybe I can talk with Tim. He posted quickly in Zulip that he couldn't attend today, but that he would be happy with whatever decision is made. So, but yeah, I can, however, tomorrow also talk with him and also discuss again the reservations, and then we'll try to decide something.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to post a comment just expressing my opinion of delegating that responsibility to you and Tim, and then we'll see what you guys come back with.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Olaf, for bringing that up, and of course for all your work. Thank you for aggregating the results as well as aggregating the options. So thank you for moving that forward. Okay. Let's see. We have we're going to try to run through the remaining issues for the 122 milestone, which there's 4 of them, and we'll see if we can get through them. The first one is 3992, dropping support for versions of PHP prior to 5.6. That's been in the needs review state for almost 2 months now. I think that we may be at a point where we just need to say, okay, let's get this in, because we're not going to make the deadline for the next release unless it gets merged soon, I think. Our hope had always been to have it in for the longest amount of time possible to allow for regression checking and things of that nature. And so without any other movement, I think that that's the option that we have to move forward is just get it in. It is passing full test coverage, and all of the feedback has mostly been about whether or not we still need 1 or 2 of the things that we used to have in place for compatibility. It's questionable if we still need to maintain them. But officially, like, it does, drop support and prevents you from using backdrop on those lower PHP versions. Next up, add entity reference to core, issue 1301. This issue has seen a lot of excitement recently, where we are trying out a full pivot here from using the reference module from Contrib to using entity reference. And we've had HerbDuel, the maintainer of entity reference, do work to prepare entity reference for being included in core, and he's now filed a pull request that maintains the entity reference history all the way from Drupal 7 through the Contrib module in backdrop now into core, which is what we request for all modules that are moved into core, is that they maintain their Git history. And yeah, he's got it in there. That there's now a pull request that needs review that just literally just plops the module into core. So that's interesting in itself. That gives us something to try out. Although fundamentally, it's really just the Contrib module in core. The obvious next things we need to prepare it, or we need to add status report messages, add it to backdrop merged modules, I think is the name of the function. And that simply, that has an automatic behavior that if you have both the Contrib module and the core module installed or available, it just posts notices to the status report saying you should remove the Contrib module unless you've done this intentionally to let the core module take its place. And so we've done that for 7 or 8 modules already. So that's things like, redirect and link module. Lots of modules we've already done this sort of thing where we've taken the Contrib module and put it into core. So this is a known process that we have. We then have follow-up issues to deal with things like term reference is included in taxonomy module, and we need to come up with a process for replacing it with entity reference long term. I don't think that we need that for the initial implementation of entity reference, however, so that that can be a follow-up. Even the initial inclusion of a reference field in core, we don't need to turn it on out of the box. It would be, in a way, kind of like an experimental module that is there but not turned on yet, like we did for telemetry. So the real interesting thing is I think that we need people's feedback as to the overall approach at this point, because like we never really made the decision that entity reference is the way to go, but we did all decide that entity reference is the easiest solution, the most mature solution, and the most flexible one, and the one that most people are using, and the one that has the most dependencies. So there's a lot of good reasons why we should use entity reference. And so far there hasn't been any new opposition since Herb put in the work to remove the concerns that we had previously. So I would love to get just people's general, like, hey, I tried out term reference, or I tried out entity reference, and here's how I felt about using it. I think those sorts of opinions would be useful at this point. It would also be interesting because entity reference is made as a contrib module. If there's any kind of discrepancies with, like, what you would expect in an out of the box experience, obviously we're still going to have term reference versus entity reference for the time being, but what can we do? Like, are there any other weird inconsistencies that make putting entity reference into core awkward? But that is very exciting that there's the pull request and that's moving forward.
So Nate, just to be clear, with the entity, with the new reference, if you have the module installed, the module that you installed overrides the core version?
Yeah, correct. So if you already had entity reference installed on your site and you upgrade to the next version of Backdrop that moves it into core, your contrib module still takes precedence.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it basically makes so nothing happens to your existing site, which is what we want, really. And then at a time when you want to switch to the core version, you simply remove it
Move it.
and then clear the caches, and then it picks up the new location.
Okay. That seems pretty straightforward, that it shouldn't cause any issues with people.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure if this has happened, but the contrib module could also, in theory, have updates to it that specifically call out the fact that maybe you should turn it off because the contrib module can still have new releases and changes. We just really discourage that because we don't want them to actually diverge in terms of capability.
Yep.
But has that been tested? Would you say it? So
no, I mean,
have a site
not for entity reference. It would be super helpful to have that tested. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think actually the current pull request doesn't add it to Backdrop merged modules yet either. So there's also like that small component that probably needs to be done before the pull request can really be tested for that purpose.
Is 1.22 for June?
May, actually. So it's really tight, honestly, for this entity reference one. And it hasn't been planned this whole release, so I'm not optimistic that it will actually be completed. Feature freeze is May 1st, so that only gives us, less than 4 weeks to
What's the ticket number for that?
to wrap it up. 1301.
And is that listed on 21.22 already? I don't see it there.
No, it's not. It's only a candidate.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think maybe I just wanted to bring that one up just because it's important. One of the most important issues we have. And it also has seen a lot of activity. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I'll just quickly reference these last two issues. There's a real small issue, issue
So,
5000.
so I'm gonna ask another question about
Oh.
that. Sorry, just to know about it. So if we would put it into core and someone doesn't have entity reference now, it would just be turned off and would be available like many other modules. So there's no downside there. If someone had entity reference installed but wasn't using it and it was in core, there wouldn't be any issue there.
Mm-mm.
If someone had entity reference installed and we put it in core, they would still use their installed version until they take it out.
Mhm.
So really, there's not much downside to this right now because we could put it in and it would be available, but the currently people that have it installed would still have it installed until they intentionally took it out.
Mhm.
And then they would start using the entity reference module.
Yep. You
Okay,
got it. And if people had a different reference module, like node reference, or so that's references, or the reference module, either of those two other options,
you would still use that.
they would still use those. Yep, and they would be from the contrib repository, and entity reference would be available but disabled on their site.
So it sounds like even though this is kind of a big change, it's not actually a big change for the user experience until they take action. And even if they took action and took their module out and used the core, they could still put their module back in if they had issues.
Yep, but they're literally the same module also. So
Right.
yeah, so they're not going to have issues. Yeah, and on top of all of that, this also, if we put it in initially, it won't be even enabled on new installations.
Yes, right.
So there really is like this won't actually do anything to any existing site by putting it in, but it will substantially impact the way that we move forward, like removing term reference, for example, and turning on entity reference by default. And if we do remove term reference entirely, that could cause problems for some sites because then entity reference would need to be turned on to replace it. So that then you really could end up with a situation they have both entity reference and node reference enabled at the same time. But all of those things are kind of like that's not the problem that we're facing immediately. Those are all down the road problems.
You know, given that situation, I think it's might be a good candidate issue to push forward here and get started on that process and then take later steps after that.
Yep.
Just to
Yeah.
know that. I mean,
You're
I think
saying all.
that's
Yeah.
it's not a dangerous proposition we have here that things could break. So I think it's good to expedite that.
Yep. You saying all those things makes it sound feasible, which it conceivably is. It's really, this is a decision that we're going to be stuck with for quite a while, and I think that's my primary
I see.
concern. It's like we're really like we're setting ourselves into this path
In
for
motion.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Which would honestly be a really good thing because our reference situation is very confusing and probably one of the biggest downsides I think to Backdrop over Drupal is like Backdrop doesn't have references out of the box, and our mentality has been you don't need to download stuff after you install Backdrop, and you have to install a reference module. It's crucial for a system like Backdrop to be able to do references.
Can I ask
So,
one more question? I know we're a little late here, but what about the migration path from Drupal 7 into Backdrop? Is there an easy process of bringing in references and using that core module to do that?
if you've used entity reference in Drupal 7, it includes the upgrade path to Backdrop already. So entity reference to entity reference already works. Similarly, references, node reference and user reference to references in contrib also provides its upgrade path from Drupal 7. So if you're using that in Drupal 7, you install the same thing for Backdrop and and it upgrades. We probably will want at some point a convert from one field to the other so that you can get off of term reference onto entity reference if that's the solution we go with. And the problem is that there's so many of them that like supporting them is complicated and possibly not a good core fit because you may need to adjust them. And it's like whether or not you're coming from Drupal 7 or whether or not you're coming from the backdrop version are also different situations. So I think it would be best suited by a contrib solution that deals with that. And the only thing core would handle would probably be term references, getting them from term references to entity references, because that's the only problem that core itself has created.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Wilbur. Those are all great questions. We're out of time. We had a couple other issues, but we'll just postpone those and maybe we'll check in on them next week. Both of them are in good places anyway, so maybe they'll be merged by this time next week.
Okay.
Any last words?
Just a reminder to post the comment in the card.
Thank you.
You for
Yeah, I've got the window
delegation.
open and the sentence typed. I'll finish it
Okay.
before I get up from my computer. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Great conversation, and we'll see you online and next week.